You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. If you'd like to learn more about the Bearded Theologians, you can go online at beardedtheologians.com, where we have past podcasts, blogs, and a couple items for sale. So check us out, beardedtheologians.com. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this week's show. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold. And today we have a returning guest, friend of the podcast, the Right Holy Reverend Matt Rawle.
Yes.
Did I get that right? Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
He's pastor in Asbury United Methodist Church in Bossier City, Louisiana. We had Matt on before to talk about the Gift of the Nutcracker, an Advent book, and you've got a new book coming out that we're going to talk about here shortly. But Matt, thanks for being on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was great fun last time, and I hope to keep that bar going this time.
Of course. Since then, Matt and I have lowered the bar significantly, so
Good. Excellent.
Just step on over. Great. Well, you wrote a book, a new one called The Grace of Les Mis. Tell us a little bit about that and why you wrote it, how all that good stuff.
Yeah, so Les Miserables was my favorite musical in high school. I was a musical junkie, and a couple years ago I had the chance to see the show in Dallas, which is about 3 hours east of 3 hours west of where we are here in Bossier. And one of my former youth, when I was a youth director, was the conductor for the show. So I got connected with him, and he gave us a backstage tour after the show, which was really cool. And on the way home, I texted some folks at Abingdon. I said, this will make a really great study, right? Because Les Miserables, it's a story about grace. It's not built, and this is kind of my deal, right? It's not billed as a Christian work, but there are Christian themes throughout the whole thing. And fundamentally, the story is about what happens when grace and justice collide. Because we talk about God as a God of love and a God of grace, but also a God of justice. But what happens when those two things inhabit the same space at the same time? Can you have grace and justice both working together? Are they counter to each other? And that's really fundamentally what the book is about, because you have a guy like Jean Valjean, who's the main character of the story, and he embodies the idea of grace, of what it means to be redeemed. But then you have Police Inspector Javert, who is the antithesis, right? He's the antagonist in the story, and he represents this sense of unwavering justice. And the whole of the book is seeing them wrestle it out of like whose paradigm is going to win. So Valjean, it starts with Valjean, and the chapters are divided according to these different ideas. So chapter 1 is about grace, the nature of grace. Chapter 2 is about Javert and justice. Chapter 3 is about poverty, because poverty is kind of its own character in the book. It kind of unites everybody together. Chapter 4 is about love, with this character of Marius and Cosette. Chapter 5 is about revolution, because at the end of the book, you have the friends of the ABC who are trying to overthrow the government. And as Christians, how do we understand revolution? And then the last chapter, which is interesting, the last chapter is different than all the others, because there's another character in the book, and it's the role of gardens in the book. And that holy place of a garden is throughout almost anything that's important that happens in a book happens in a garden in the story. And I've always said, if I had the awesome responsibility of giving the Bible a title, it would be The Tale of Three Gardens. You have the Garden of Eden, and then the Garden of Gethsemane and the Garden Tomb, and then ultimately the urban garden at the end of the story when there's a New Jerusalem, right? And the tree of life is in the middle. And you see that play out through the whole book. But I love how, the story begins. Valjean he stole a loaf of bread to feed his family. And he originally is sentenced to 5 years, but he gets 19 years in prison because he keeps trying to escape. And the musical portrays Valjean as this character who is redeemed, and he's heroic, and he never makes a bad decision. But that's not the case in the book. He's kind of a rascal in the book, and he's like an addict who has to constantly choose the good throughout the story. His redemption takes the whole story, or as I like to say, he was convicted earlier in the story, but his conversion really doesn't happen until the very, very end. And that's a very kind of Wesleyan way to look at sanctification, right? It's though it can happen at once, right? We've read the people called Methodists. It can all happen at once, but it usually takes a lifetime to figure that out. I love at the beginning of the story where a priest takes Valjean in, and Monsieur Bienvenu is his name, and he takes Valjean in, and he gives him all this stuff, and Valjean repays him by stealing all of his silver and sneaking out at night, right? Because he's a criminal. Like this is, and he's apprehended by the police. The police bring him back to the priest's house, and the priest lies to the police. He goes, no, he didn't steal the silver. I gave it to him as a gift. Oh, and you forgot, here's some candlesticks too. You know, you left these behind because you left so quickly. And that really sets the tone for how Valjean understands ethics. His freedom was bought with a lie, kind of this very Dietrich Bonhoeffer way of truth-telling, right? You know, if I'm harboring Jews and a Nazi knocks on my door and asks me if I'm harboring Jews, I'm going to say no. And that's not breaking a commandment, you know. So that really sets the tone for Valjean's struggle. You know, it'd be easy to choose the good if the good was obvious. And that's what he wrestles with the entire story of how to choose the good. Like I said, he's like an addict every day making that conscious decision. And he doesn't always get it right throughout the story. But I love how the story begins with an ethical dilemma. It's not the St. Augustine where the truth is the truth and a lie is a lie. It's this truth-telling is that which is life-giving. And that plays out through the whole story. So that's where it begins. And I love wrestling with those ethical dilemmas. You know, he is offered grace through a lie. And what does that mean in our Christian story, you know? So he starts a life and he becomes the mayor. And this is when Javert jumps into the story. Javert is the police chief. He's looking for Valjean. He knows he's out there. And he finally connects with him in a city called Montreuil, where Valjean is the mayor of the city. And Javert is actually under him in terms of class and status. And that messes with Javert's head, right? Because Javert grew up in a prison. Like we all react to adversity in different ways. Valjean reacts to adversity by trying to do the good. Javert reacts to adversity by offering order. Like that's his game, man. God brings order to chaos. So when things get chaotic, Javert gets it messes with his brain, messes with his worldview. And for Javert, he has this very clear black and white understanding of what justice is. There is right and there is wrong. Criminals cannot be redeemed. So it messes with him when Valjean is the mayor and outranks him. Like that's not supposed to happen. And I love talking about how grace and justice can actually be the same thing. A story I lift up in the book is Jesus standing before the woman that was caught in adultery, and how both grace and justice exist in that same place. You know, there's great grace in that Jesus says, you know, he who is without sin cast the first stone. Is there no one to condemn you? Well, then neither do I. You know, go and sin no more. But there's also great justice in Jesus reminding them that it is not just for the guilty to pass judgment on the guilty. Or what's probably more accurate is those who have power to take advantage of those who don't. Regardless of if someone did something right or wrong, those with power to lord it over them, right? Because there was only one, it takes two to tango, my friends. And there was only one person who was brought there. And Jesus reminds them, and they get it, right? They walk away. They put their stones down and they walk away. You know, is the priest lying to the police, is that just? It certainly is graceful. Anyway, so you have these two characters, Valjean and Javert, who kind of duke it out in terms of their world vision. And Javert eventually starts tracking Valjean down by putting on a disguise. So while Valjean is like growing into, as Wesley would say, growing into perfection, right? This redeemed life, making good decisions, and sin has lost its grip on him. Valjean is very different. He starts to slip and downward spiral. And it reminds me of this story. This is a fantastic story. It's in 1 Samuel. It's called Samuel's Ghost and the Witch of Endor. That is not in the lectionary for obvious reasons, because it's weird. It's a weird story, man. So it's great. So Saul, who's the king, right? He goes out into the woods, and he asks his men to go find a medium, which is interesting because Saul has expelled all of them. But they find one, which means that Saul enacted a law that no one followed. So he's completely impotent in terms of his leadership. Right. So he finds this medium in the woods, and he says, conjure Samuel's ghost for me. So she does. Like, this is wicked. In this, like, where is Samuel coming from? Like, is it Sheol? Is it heaven? Is it like, what is this? So this ghost comes up from the ground, and it says that, before Saul went into the woods, he put on other clothing, is what the English says. But in the Hebrew, that actually means treachery. He puts on treachery. He loses all of his authority. He puts on these other clothes, and Samuel's ghost does not give him a good word, man. he says, you and your sons will be with me tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Like, how ominous is that? And that's true, man. They lost to the Philistines big time. Right. It's kind of like Clemson and LSU at the national championship. It was handed to them, man, and the right people won, I guess. So
you worked that in perfectly.
That's what I do, baby. That's what I do.
Mark that at 23 minutes.
Exactly. Bring that up. So Javert starts sneaking around in disguise, and he starts to become what he's been fighting against, right? And how old is that story, right? It's like Luke going to the dark side. Is it, or no? It's what is that? Is it Spider-Man? No, Batman. You either see yourself die a hero or live long enough to become the villain, right? And that's what's happening in Les Mis. That's what's happening, and it's a reminder of us of this conversation between means and ends, right? Does the end ever justify the means, right? Les Mis is a fantastic story of wrestling with this kind of stuff. Eventually, Javert is captured at the barricades because he's literally in disguise, and Valjean lets him go. Because Valjean has finally started to receive an understanding of what grace is, right? Taking Javert's life is not worth it. Life is precious, and he lets Javert go, but Javert cannot live in that world. Like, Valjean is a criminal. He can never be redeemed. There is only right. There is only wrong. According to that worldview, Valjean should take his life, but he doesn't. He lets him go. But Javert cannot live with that, and he eventually throws himself off a bridge and dies, commits suicide in the story. And there's so much in that. There's so much in that story about despair, and because we are so uncomfortable with learning. We love what we've been taught. It is a security blanket, and when that is turned upside down, we have a very tough time wrestling with that. It's like when you say, because one of my pet peeves is when, like, after a sermon, someone will catch me in the narthex and they'll say something like, well, I've always been taught that Jonah meant, fill in the blank,
right?
Right. And part of the problem is we stopped reading the Bible after Vacation Bible School. Like right around the time when your brain is ready to accept extended metaphor, right? And some of these things is when we stop reading the Bible. It's crazy. And I'll say things like, Jonah is a story. We miss the point of Jonah if we try to work out physiologically how he lived in the belly of a fish.
Yeah, we argue too much about fish or a whale or how do you do this, right?
Oh my gosh! And Jonah is this great. Oh man, Jonah is this great example of absurdity. It's an absurd story. And there are these markers all along the way. Like, so I love it. He's in the belly of the fish, and he has this great prayer, like, God, you save everyone, and you're so awesome, and you're so good. And God's response to that is the fish vomits him up on the shore of Nineveh.
Right.
Great prayer, Jonah. Blech. It's just, there you go. That's God's opinion of that prayer. And it says that so Nineveh is a 3-day journey across. He goes in one day. He walks one day into the city. So he doesn't even get to Main Street. Like, he doesn't even get to downtown. And he gives the shortest prophecy in all of the Bible, right? 6 days time you're going to burn or whatever it is, like turn or burn, And it works. He's the most pathetic, but also the most successful prophet in the entire Old Testament. And like the entire city, they wear sackcloth and ashes. They even put it on the livestock, which is absurd to see chickens running around with sackcloth. That's crazy. But the real absurdity, so this is fantastic. So Jonah leaves the city, and he finds out that they've converted. And he's like, what? But instead of saying like, great job, God, like, I know that you are slow to anger and abounding steadfast love, he walks to the other side of the city. 3 days journey. He walks to the other side. He couldn't be bothered to walk that far to actually do what God was telling him to do, but to serve himself, he walked to the other side of the city. Like, that's absurd. What a terrible prophet. He's the Scrooge of the Old Testament, man. He's terrible. And he sits there like, I know God's going to come to his senses, so I'm just going to wait here and wait for the city to explode. Right. And the way the story, ends, again, it's hilarious. It's this Jonathan Swift modest proposal kind of the story. And God says, no, I have forgiven them. And the livestock also. That's literally how it ends. And the livestock too. Like, that's just, if you're not laughing at the end of that story, like you're missing the whole point. If you have to explain a joke, then you've missed the point of the joke. Right. Which, by the way, fun fact, I finally had, why did the chicken cross the road to get to the other side? Explained to me. Okay. Why that's funny. Why did the chicken cross? He wants to be hit by a car. He wants to get to the other side, not the other side of the road. But he wants to get to the afterlife. Right. Wow. It's funny, right? It's good stuff.
Like, I feel like I've learned something today. It's very
There's a lot of play there.
It's so meta, man. It is so meta.
It is.
Why did the chicken cross the road?
And that will definitely preach in its own right.
Yeah.
So as you, so with this book that you have out on the gospel or the grace of Les Miserables, what, like, if a church was looking to implement this, when would be a good season within the church calendar to do that, if a church follows the church calendar?
Yeah, Lent is really an ideal time to do it. You can do it at any time, right? But it's also, it's intentionally divided into 6 chapters, right? For the 6 weeks of Lent, we intentionally use the last week to talk about the tale of 3 gardens, right? Especially the Garden of Gethsemane and the Garden Tomb. And is this journey, because Lent is appropriately a heavy time, right? It's searching your own soul, preparing for resurrection, where you're really kind of following Jean Valjean's journey from criminal to redemption. And that's really helpful to do during the season of Lent. So, I mean, you could read it at any time, and your church could do it at any time. But ideally, Lent is a really appropriate time to jump into it. In terms of worship too, there's a lot of even musical things that you can do in worship based on the musical. And I mean, one of the great songs in the musical is "Bring Him Home." God on high, hear my prayer. And it's so fantastic. So Lent is really the ideal time to do it, divided into 6 chapters. It makes it really easy, especially if you're a pastor. I love trying to make things easy for clergy, right? That's my life, man. Right. And it has, sermon starters, graphics that you can share. It's divided into 6 weeks. There's a leader guide. There's a youth study guide so that the youth can do it. And it's really, we try to make it very, very easy for the entire church to participate in this. And you look like a pro, man. Like you order this stuff and you have graphics ready to go and a sermon outlined already. And you look like super with it. When I know that we're not.
Well, and I know, like, that's what I appreciated about the gift of the Nutcracker. You had all that stuff available for us. You was able to share that and utilize that, and it's a great resource that's put out there for churches that are looking for something that can be easily handled, and maybe something you don't have to reinvent the wheel on.
Man, there's plenty to do during Lent, especially Holy Week. There's enough, man, to make it easy on yourself. Yeah, let us do the heavy lifting for you.
You created some videos for this too. Right.
Yeah, there's a DVD too, and let me tell the DVD is super. Right. They brought out the fancy cameras for this one, nice. So I'm super excited about it. Shot on location, track cam. It's really super. The DVD is easy. to use, because it gives the highlights, and it helps the folks who are leading a small group discussion, gives them one leg up in terms of facilitating that.
Right.
You can also now get it digitally with Amplify Media, which is super helpful.
Yep.
It's right there. It's one click away. In fact, our church, we've moved to digital products. Our Sunday school classes now have wireless. Our teachers feel really well equipped, especially when it's Saturday night and it's 8 o'clock and they're like, oh no, I'm teaching tomorrow, and the lesson is on the wrestling of grace and justice. Like, are you kidding me?
Right.
So at home, man, they just log in, click the button, and there it is. And it's we want to make it easy and fruitful, you know.
Yeah. And that was almost the point I was getting at, to have a shameless plug for Amplify. Because you're on there. We have some stuff on there.
Yeah, it's helpful, man.
Yeah, it really is. I've heard a lot of good feedback, had some good feedback of my own. Yeah. So no, I love that we're moving in that direction where we're including all things, right? All ways of people learning and teaching, from top to bottom. Use what you want, use what you need, and leave the other stuff aside. It's fine, you know.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
We're starting to get less linear in how we're doing these things, writing books, doing sermon studies, doing Bible studies.
Well, we're creating
things.
We're not just creating a product, we're creating an environment, right?
Yeah,
An ecosystem, because with everything, man, everything is changing very, very quickly, just in the way that we do shopping and discussions and commerce, you know, all these things.
And when you take a look at, I got to talk about grace and justice at the same piece. Where do I even start, right? And to have not only your resources there, but others to dig into and hopefully find helpful, you know, just find more pieces of information that sources your trust. And
it's helpful for churches because it's okay. Well, let's study. Let's dive into justice a little bit more, or whatever. You can literally search justice instead of. Much love to Cokesbury representatives, right? And the live chat feature, which I use. You can do that on your own and get it and literally click a button and look at it in real time instead of waiting for a couple days for a book to come in that has been recommended, and then you have to postpone for a week because you didn't get it in time for Sunday. And so it's really helpful, and it helps us, I think, as a church. One, it's super important for us to get a good narrative out. Like, we fundamentally are storytellers, and we need to get that story out. And it helps us to create a whole ecosystem and an environment to better reach people. You know, I'm fascinated with the cultural. Church is weird. Yeah. The act of going to church is weird.
It is.
I haven't been with my entire family to the grocery store. We order our stuff on. I have 4 kids. Like, that's impossible to get everybody together to go to the store. I literally can't remember the last time we all went to the Kroger together, you know, to get milk. It's just, it's exhausting. And then there's the checkout line with like all of the chocolate and stuff. And you have to be a jerk to your kids and say no, and then they hate you for a day. And
that's right.
So like, we don't do a lot of brick and mortar things anymore. But then here we have church, and we're expecting young families of 4 to like get everybody dressed and get to the church. In other words, the church is still very much in kind of this industrial revolution mode, because the industrial age was effective when everyone was there all at the same time. Right. That's how it worked, right? If somebody was missing on the factory line, the product didn't get made. You know, and that's still in a lot of cases how church is organized. You need everybody there all at the same place at the same time. We've gotten better at things like, obviously, like podcasting and live streaming and these kind of things. So we're starting to just now figure it out that we're asking families, and I say families because that's just my stage, right? That's just kind of, I'm immersed in it, like 24 flipping hours a day of this, the age and stage. And we're expecting people to do what they're not doing anywhere else. And becoming a tall order, this brick and mortar kind of experience. When you have the Amazons of the world and Netflix and these kind of things, that's changing the game. And what is our response to that? How do we, you know, when Uber is the biggest taxi service but owns no cars, Amazon is the biggest marketplace and has no stores, or few stores. There are now a couple of stores, which is really cool. You just like walk in and grab stuff and leave. So you get this feeling that you're stealing something, which is kind of cool and fun and exciting. But kids don't listen to Pastor Matt. But yeah, so like this whole environment is changing in the way we do church, and I'm thankful that something like Amplify is getting off the ground. I think it's extremely helpful.
Yeah.
And so this segment was brought to you by Amplify Media. But you know, thinking, and that's kind of one of the things is like one of the things that I always look for when doing something like your books or something like that. Like I love it when it's like the complete package. When I can have something that like I don't have to spend time creating new media or stuff like that, and I can just put it out there and like look at me, I look really cool because I have this really cool Gift of the Nutcracker logo stuff, and like all I did was just download it from the and that's helpful for churches and pastors that maybe don't have a staff person dedicated to that sort of thing. And I think that that's important, especially in this day and age when that's what everybody's doing, and having great graphics and stuff like that. Being able to not spend time doing that is so helpful.
Yeah, and it's the point is to equip pastors to pastor, right, and to lead. So the like, for example, one thing that we're working on here is because we have a very 1950s model of church registration, right? So you pass out the pew pad and people sign it illegibly,
right?
So they sign the thing and they can't read it anyway. And we have a volunteer that tears it out and then inputs it in a computer. And then about a day and a half later, I get the report of who was there, who wasn't there, that kind of thing. Now, if we could skip that step, it's not just, the fun of, because I love playing with technology. It's not just trying to be innovative in the way we do that. But if I don't have to wait a day and a half to get that report, that means I can be in ministry with people during that day and a half, right? So we put all these products together, not only because they're telling a good story, and a good narrative, but it equips pastors to do what they're trained to do and to be pastors. You're not having to figure out the right media to share. You're not having to do a sermon from scratch. It's all, right there. You can give your leaders a DVD or an Amplify, account. And that really frees you up to do what you're actually called to do, right? Which is to be with people, right? And to get them connected with Christ. So, and that's part of the name of the game, is to equip pastors to be pastors,
right? Well, and I'm going to poorly attempt to try to tie this back into your book, based on chapter titles alone. Yeah. But when you look at revolution, you look at change and changing how we do, and not why we do. The why is the same, but it's the how. Change is tough in the church, and
it is, right.
And we're looking at shrinking staff. That they're having to tend to, and so revolutionizing the way that we do ministry and prepare for the things that we can do, it's huge.
Exactly. And in the book there is this commentary about revolution, right, about change, especially in the character of Marius, who is this French romantic. And what I mean by that is the latest thing he's heard is the most important. So he starts the story by being a fan of the monarchy. And then he's a big fan of Napoleon because his dad fought with Napoleon and he found out that he was lied to. But then he has his friends of the ABC, which in French is Les Amis de Abbasset. Abbasset, it's a play on words, which means the oppressed. So they're the friends of the oppressed, friends of the ABC. And then he joins their rank, right? But then he falls in love with Cosette. And he's like, well, I don't want to fight, and I want to, live with you. And then he goes back, and there's this commentary of, is the story really about whether you have a king or a revolutionary guard or a despot, or, because if there's corruption in the system, it doesn't matter what form of government you have. Like it's still, and there's, especially France during that time, man, everything was turned upside down over and over and over again. And unfortunately, when we're not flexible enough, and when we're not prepared to recognize that change isn't necessarily a bad thing, in the book, at least, it teaches that when you're out of options, there is only bloodshed that is left. And I'll put on my clergy collar for the church, right? Because sometimes we the anxiety is so high that we feel like we have to win an argument, right? We have to win. We can't live into change. We have to preserve and protect and win. And Jesus has a really interesting teaching on what it means to win, right? There's a miracle at the beginning of Holy Week that isn't slated as a miracle. And I think that's unfortunate, right? So he goes into Jerusalem, tension is high, There's lots of extra soldiers there. They're ready. He rides, a donkey into the city, which is him saying, I am the Messiah, right? I'm the Messiah. I'm a king. I'm ready to go. But there wasn't any bloodshed. And I find that fascinating because I know the disciples were packing, like, because later in the story, Peter cuts off the guy's ear with a sword. So there were swords there, but no one took out a sword. Jesus, even pushing back against the Pharisees and pushing back against Rome, there was relative peace. And I think that teaches us a lot about the role of what revolution is. When Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world, he's not talking about something that's up there and out there and in heaven. And, what he's saying is the world I'm building is not going to be built by the rules of Rome.
Right.
Right. But yeah, navigating change is important, especially right now. When everything, our economic models, like last week, I was in Los Angeles studying economic disturbance, like Netflix versus Blockbuster, right? Blockbuster was ill-equipped for the revolution that Netflix brought, and disturbances are sometimes really helpful because it reminds the system of what is necessary and what is not necessary. And we did a lot of work of thinking about what theological disturbance looks like, and that's fascinating. Sometimes it's just a grain of salt in the machinery of the world. That makes a pearl, right? It makes all the difference. That aggravation eventually leads to beauty, but it's a pain to be in the midst of the aggravation while it's happening.
Right.
So dealing with disturbance and navigating the aggravation of change is something that we need to be better at. I think, frankly, and it will serve us well moving into the future.
Yeah. No, I think so. I like that. Oh, I like that disturbance. Because revolution doesn't come without cost. It doesn't come without growing pains. It doesn't come out without heartache. It's work, and it's just work. And often it seems like the church doesn't want to do that work, or are afraid to do that work, or whatever. There's something there that holds us back from that aggravation that we see. We see and feel the Holy Spirit moving and agitating and doing these things, and yet we're going, but this is the way we do it, and we're going to make people fit into our mold, and they're going elsewhere. They're going and doing
it's
other
like
things.
the middle of the 23rd Psalm. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Sometimes we err on the side of, and God is with me, where God is like this protective blanket that holds us. And there's a time and a place, right? That's an important lesson too. But there's also a lesson of like walking through the valley and going through that darkness and that place, and knowing that God is also with you there, because it's not comfortable. Like in the Gospel of Mark, when Jesus comes out of the water, it says the Spirit drove him to the wilderness. The Spirit didn't politely ask him if he wanted to go. It just, it drove him into the wilderness. And that's, and I'm also fascinated that Jesus's ministry and mission began with fasting and prayer. It's incredible. But sometimes it takes being driven to an unfamiliar place, or the grain of sand in the machinery of the world to disturb it just enough for it to find its purpose.
Right.
Well, I think that's where in the church we're so afraid of failure.
Sure.
And that failure is bad. And this is something we've been talking around here, is that, like, we're going to do things and it's not going to work. And we're just going to have to, like, all right, so this is why it didn't work, and understand like why it didn't work, but then come back again and say, all right, so we're going to do something like this, but a lot different, because obviously you all responded with the way that you didn't show up. And so we want to do something differently. And so I think like the whole idea of the culture of innovation, like we need to breed that within our church, of saying, like, telling our youth people or our children's people, like, take some risk, shake it up a little bit, do something different. And it's okay. Like, I think we've become so protective of the things that we forget that we're really called to be this continual innovation and this continual growth of dying and being resurrected and, being renewed and being reborn. I mean, like, man, it's all right there. For us, like, the way to make the church better, it's all right there. We just err on the side of that, like you said, like caution. Like, we're more concerned about being caution than we are.
Right. And I do think there needs to be a healthy dose of affirmation, right? If I'm going to risk and I fail, Am I now going to be kicked out? Am I never going to be asked to lead again? Am I going to be shipped to Timbuktu to be the pastor in Nowheresville? If I fail. So there, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art with me. So there is an important lesson in terms of the comfort of, I need to be given permission to fail, and be given an opportunity to try again. And that, especially just in kind of the ecosystem of kind of where we are, failing isn't rewarded. And I think that makes me sad because 99 bad ideas get you to the one that changes the world. Right. And you have to, I don't know what I'm probably on idea number 73, like bad idea number 73, and I need the confidence to know that I'll get several more tries to get to the thing that changes the world. So yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that ties in with the black and white of the story, the characters in the story of it's black and white, it's this or that. And then that ethical dilemma of gray area that sits in between that of, is this right? Is this wrong? Is what I've always been told, living in this gray area that, in these moments we need to do this, which is contrary to what everybody's ever told me that's wrong. Right. But in this moment, it's right.
Yeah, I love it. Even when we look at our own story, right? So the last book of the Old Testament is Malachi. The last book of the Hebrew Scriptures is Malachi. And it talks about the Messiah and talks about fire and the wicked will be turned to rubble and the great and terrible day of the Lord. And then Jesus appears on the scene. He even catches John the Baptist by surprise. Because like John the Baptist is like, okay, you're going to baptize me with the Holy Spirit. He goes, actually, no. Like, you're going to baptize me. Yeah. I mean, so I know you read Malachi and I know that you're primed for the great and terrible day of the Lord. But this is how this is going to start. You're going to baptize me. And then I'm going to go in the wilderness for 40 days. Yeah. Like, can you imagine if someone asked you to plant a church and you said, it's great. I'm going to go now be alone. I'm not going to file any paperwork. I'm not going to give you a strategic plan. I'm going to go in the wilderness for 40 days and not eat anything. Right. Like that's on the surface sounds like a really bozo plan. So even at the very beginning, Jesus's ministry was counterintuitive. Even the disciples, the whole story, man, the disciples are a bunch of numbskulls in the Gospel of Mark, man. They don't get it. Jesus even, I love it. He's so frustrated. Like, how long, oh Lord? How long must I be with you, numbskulls? You're not getting this. Failure. Oh my gosh, the gospel and failure. Put yourself in the perspective of the disciples. Right. Hey Jesus, this town didn't accept us, so call the fire down. And Jesus is like, oy vey, like that's not how this works. Shake the dust off your feet and move on. Even in the resurrection, Mary mistakes Jesus as a gardener. Right. Like there's this constant, which I would argue is not a case of mistaken identity. She sees Jesus for who Jesus really is. Because God's first act was planting a garden. So of course she thinks Jesus is a gardener because she's actually seeing Christ for who Christ is, the one that offers life, the offer cultivation and growth and these kind of things. Yeah.
One of my favorite ways to describe Jesus and his relationship with the disciples is one of a frustrated parent of just, I can't find my shoes. How many times
how long
to put your shoes up?
You only have 2 sandals, Peter. Why can you not find?
That's right. Jesus, show us a miracle.
Or pick up the Lego. I just did. Pick up the Lego.
Were you not there yesterday? Yeah, exactly.
Did you not see me feed the 5,000? You want me to do it again?
Come on, man. What other sign? And I love it because the only sign that you're going to be given is the sign of Jonah. Here we're bringing it back to Jonah. Perfect. And the sign of Jonah is not 3 days in the belly of a fish. The sign of Jonah is forgiveness. Yeah, redemption. You want to see a miracle, then live into forgiveness and live into grace, and that will be the sign that is given to you. That's the sign of Jonah, is redemption. Right. That's the miracle.
Yep.
So we could definitely talk for days on all sorts of things.
Sure.
Definitely. I mean, I know we could, but we probably should wrap it up. And so the book is The Grace of Les Miserables. You can find it at Cokesbury or Amplify Media or Amazon.
Anywhere good books are sold.
Yeah, anywhere good books are sold. And Matt, we thank you for your time, and you're always welcome to come back and talk with us. When the next book comes out, whenever that is.
Yeah, man. Yeah, we're working on it. But yeah, thanks for having me. This is always a blessing to me just to hang out with y'all for a few.
Yeah, for sure. We appreciate your time and efforts and all that you're doing. It's super fun. So, and I like when you do videos, because then you look enough like me that I can just put them up on the screen. My church is like, oh, Zach's out of town again.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. You know, I did recently trim my beard, so I have to grow it back for next time, so that the bald and the beard will be
it's perfect.
Feng shui with each other. Yeah.
Perfect.
So I'm going to encourage you to go on our website, and we'll have a link to where you can pick up Matt's book on our website at beardedtheologians.com. Feel free to pick up a hat or something else through our buy stuff things. And so for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians Beardcast. If you'd like to learn more about the Bearded Theologians or look at our other content, go online at beardedtheologians.com. And also, don't forget to pick up one of those beautiful coffee mugs or t-shirts that we have on our website as well.